Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Krishna, and in this video, we're going to take a look at using halftone effects in a more advanced way, and we're going to use Apollo Creed. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. First thing I've done is I've got my inks on their own layer. And the strategy that we're going to use here before we go ahead and actually work with Apollo, let me just give you a quick rundown. I've got this object here. I'll make a new layer underneath. I will fill this object in with whatever base color I want. In this case, I'm going to choose red. I'll make a new layer above it, and I will choose my halftone. Now, why am I doing that? Well, because if I set this halftone with a particular layer effect, I can influence the overall hue of that halftone. Remember, halftones were created with a very limited color palette. So what this allows me to do is it allows me to go ahead and influence the hue by affecting the base color underneath. So that's the strategy that we're going to utilize here. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Let's hide everything else, just blast these layers out, and let's work with Apollo. First thing I want to do is I want to be able to create a fill for the main character. So I'll just click with the magic wand tool on all the areas that are outside of Apollo Creed. We'll inverse the selection, Shift Command I on Mac, make a brand new layer. And what we'll do next is we'll fill in a base color layer. And what I like to use for my base color layers, I like to think about the overall majority, what's the hue that's going to be represented here, and it's going to be brown. So I've got that filled in. Now with my lasso tool, I'm going to isolate parts of the character. Command J, Command U, and I can affect the overall hue. Let's make this somewhat red. I'll make it somewhat saturated. And we'll do the same thing for the boxing gloves. And if this technique looks familiar, I've talked about this many times as far as just regular digital coloring techniques. And if you're new to halftones, definitely check out one of my earlier videos where I talk about using the DeBASER toolkit to do very basic halftones. So I'm going to pick kind of a reddish color here. In fact, you know what? I want to use the same basic red, except I want to make these boxing gloves a little bit more saturated. And then we've got these areas here, the white part of the boxing gloves. So again, using the lasso tool. Why am I using the lasso tool as opposed to another selection tool? I could use the magic wand tool. Really doesn't matter as long as you do what is comfortable for you. I'll fill this area in with red, and then let's go ahead and color his eyes. Pick white. And the hair. Usually I use the lasso tool if I've got a ton of small selections that I have to make. If I had to use the magic wand tool for each of these little selections, it would take me way more time. But in this case, I can just select the whole thing much, much quicker. So I'm going to go with kind of a bluish color scheme like so. So I've got his base color set up. Now I'm ready to apply my halftone effects. So let's go back to this base brown layer. We'll command click it to make that a selection. We'll make a new layer above it. We'll come in with a kind of a reddish brown color. And now if I go back to the base layer and hit Command U, just like I've shown you before, you can influence the overall lightness and darkness. And you know what? I forgot to go ahead and set this to something like overlay or soft light. So let's take a look and see what that does. So I can influence the overall color scheme. There we go. And that's something that you couldn't do if you just use the halftones by themselves. You'd have to pick from that limited palette. So what I'm actually showing you here is kind of a way of infusing that retro sensibility with something that looks a little bit more modern. I don't know if that makes sense or not. And then let's go for the shorts here. We'll use the halftone effect here, red, and we'll select an overlay. We'll go underneath and we'll just bump up the saturation a little bit. So that gives us a much more influence of our colors. And we'll rinse and repeat that same process here for the gloves. I mean, it's all red, so I'll choose soft light for that. I'll do the same thing for the hair. With the hair, usually darker things, I will pick a darker value, like a kind of a bluish color, and I'll set that layer to something like multiply, and then I can go to the base blue layer and adjust the lightness to bring a little bit more contrast into the hair. So this kind of gives us that old school comic book vibe. Now, let's go ahead and create a rectangular halftone pattern behind Apollo. So we'll go here, we'll pick a dark color. There we go. Now our halftones are in. We don't have any highlights, we don't have any shading. Let's go ahead and add that in. And instead of using halftones for that, I'm just going to come back in with my brush tool. I'll make the brush just a little bit bigger. I'm going to have the lighting come in from the front. Which is why you're seeing all of these parts kind of accentuated. All right, so we've got the highlights in. Notice that I'm putting the highlights on a layer underneath my inks layer, and then I'll go back in now and add some darker values. I'll pick kind of a dark brown so I can get some shadow areas. And you know what, to be fair, you can do this all within halftones as well, but I kind of like this aesthetic where I have a little bit more control. I don't know, I think it just looks kind of neat. And we've got one more thing that we're going to go ahead and do here. Well, two more things actually to kind of finish this one out. Notice those highlights and shadows really kind of make the figure pop. Kind of curious, if you've watched the Apollo movies, what's your favorite Apollo, or sorry, Rocky? You've ever watched Rocky? What are your favorite Rocky movies? For me, it has to be Rocky 3 with Clubber Lang. Okay, so we've got that, right? So now we've got this all set up. Let's go ahead and let's add something like a spotlight behind him. So I'll pick a soft round brush. I'll pick kind of a pinkish color. I'll set that to screen. Reduce the brush size a little bit and just work that in. Just to give a little bit more contrast to the face, I want to create more of a focal point there. I want that pink color to kind of have some blue kind of thrown in there too. And I want some of that to also influence the character as well. So I'll make a new layer above everything. Set that also to screen. Come back in with that blue. And just have that kind of work in like so. It kind of softens up those edges. And kind of gives the idea that there's a rim light behind Apollo Creed. So that's the basic nuts and bolts of this. If you have any questions about what I've done here, please leave them in the comments below. Again, let me know what your favorite Rocky film is and what you'd like to see me cover next. I do have one more video where I'm going to talk about another halftone technique, which is painting with halftone brushes. And that's going to be coming out pretty soon. So don't forget to subscribe. And if you enjoy the video, give it a like. And thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. See ya.